Hey, Link here. Thanks for joining me for episode 92, where I speak with Robert Bailey. In this episode, we talk about how they got into the industry and words of wisdom from their experiences, games that made them want to get into the industry, games they feel don't get enough credit, their life outside of gaming, some lightning round questions, as well as other interesting topics. Before we get started, don't forget there are links in the episode description that you can follow to learn more about Robert as well as the podcast. Also, don't forget to like and share the episode, and without further ado, enjoy episode 92. Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Robert Bailey, who has previously contributed to projects such as Wayfinder, Star Trek Timelines, and currently a technical narrative designer at Sony Santa Monica. Hi, Robert. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well.
That's great to hear. Robert, thank you so much for making the time to be here. I really appreciate, you agreeing to come on and let me bother you for a bit.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So, Rob, before we get started, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, telling me and anyone listening a little bit about yourself, kind of like the elevator pitch, if you would, about like what you feel people should just know about you before we jump in and get started.
Yeah. I've been a game designer. I graduated from school in 2019. I've been a game designer working since then. Bounced around in various forms, disciplines, and across a ton of different genres, types of projects, and studio sizes. Before ending up where I am now, as you mentioned, at Sony Santa Monica in the technical narrative design role. And what I just love about games and making stuff is finding a way to tell a story in like any form of scope that I can, and just bringing out a way to kind of work with the team and elevate those moments and figure out how they integrate with everything. And that's what I find really fun about games and game making.
So, thank you for sharing that. And I've spoken to a few people or a handful of people that are kind of um newer in the sense of like the same kind of um the same like level of experience ish as you have. Um and by that I mean like right when the pandemic was about to go into like full swing, that they were starting uh their journey, if you will. So like I'm wondering in your case, how did you fare, or how did you weather that one, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, that was a really interesting time for a lot of reasons. In 2019, I started at Disruptive Beam on Star Trek Timelines, and that was a independent studio operating out in Massachusetts. And in 2020, this is at the very start of it. Like it's almost like month by month, we ended up where a group of us the project was like getting moved over to Tilting Point Games, and we were going to be starting up a new studio to kind of run Star Trek Timelines and maybe some other projects. And so that's in like January, February, if my memory's not failing me. And just as we're starting with this new team and like indie startup like kind of space, and thinking about like, okay, we're in a temp office, where do we want to go? This is the end of February, like, hey, we'll be in stable and content releases, and now we're going into merch, and maybe we want to move to a permanent office. And what is that? Oh, the entire world is shut down. And that was an interesting space because like our dev environments were pretty much all laptops, so it was really easy for us to kind of go, I guess the world shut down, sign up to head to the office, grab your stuff, and then we'll see where we are. Like maybe it'll be better next month. Next. Okay, we'll just work from home now. And on one point we had the publisher really like being an arm, so they had a bunch of institutional stuff to help out, and there were a bunch of different studios under the Tilting Point banner, and so being that helped, but it was definitely a transition into a full remote environment, and we stayed like that for a few years. And at the point where I left what had become Wicked Realm Games, it was still a like mostly remote studio. We kept I think we kept those temp offices the entire time because there was that aspect of like, oh, maybe we'll come back in, maybe things will open up. And so yeah, it was definitely interesting to navigate because you get a lot of that in person collaboration coming from a school into industry and being used to like a lot of over the desk stuff and suddenly having to figure out how to do that online. Was it was definitely a challenge. But it was an interesting one. And the thing is how the industry has adapted to remote work. There's tons of benefits to remote work. I also appreciate benefits to office work, but like right now, I'm fully remote, and it's a benefit because the it's weird to say that the pandemic had benefits, but the getting used to remote work so early in my career has definitely helped me feel more comfortable now with the type of roles that I take or where I'm even interested in applying in, and where I've found myself going and being a lot easier to work with people everywhere. And I think that's been a great help.
So, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I I am sorry. There was a few different things that you had said that, I wanted to comment on, and they all sort of jumbled in my head in the last moment there. Um I find it amusing that they kept those temp offices just for that whole, well, maybe next month, maybe we'll find a reason to keep them, right? And I imagine that would like really suck for, like you said, they were starting to look at kind of like a indie-ish foundation, I guess you would say, or I might paraphrase as or what have you, um, and like thinking about a permanent office space. So I imagine like the plans were getting drawn up. Everyone was having these like fun ideas, I guess you'd say, because I imagine like an indie space that gets an office setup is probably similar to like a startup that just gets its office setup, where like they, you know, have all these great, fun, weird ideas of things they want to try and do or whatnot. And then like holding on to that temp office, just being like, well, maybe this could be the day we get our pinball room, or maybe this is the day we get our, like ball pit or whatever,
Yeah.
Um, but no, like I'm happy to hear that worked out for you. I imagine like coming out of school, uh, where like you said, everything you had been doing was learning how to use the tools, like the physical tools, so to say. And suddenly having to like figure out everyone having to figure out how to do that remote. But at the same time, I imagine that was like a great time for it because like everyone was jumping into that same pit and like it wasn't it wasn't like you had to throw a ball far to find someone that could catch it and be like, "This is what you need to do next," or "This is what we're doing that works," or "This is what we've looked into that could work for you," right?
Yeah, and it also helped that we already had some like some fully remote people on the project that were full time devs with us. And so there were already some of that avenue, and it was just kind of okay. I guess we're all on that even playing field now, and there isn't. And like that had already been a concern. It's like how do you make the remote team members feel like part of the team when you have an in person office environment? And there were efforts on the team to make sure everyone felt like team members. And so that institution, or not institution, that like structure was already in place for us to try and expand upon when we had to go full remote.
Yeah, and like I said, that yeah, that sounds like it would have made things so much smoother for everyone and probably benefited the people that were already working remote because now they suddenly don't feel like the man left out or what have you. They're, like you said, it leveled the playing field. Everyone's like, like the things that work for everyone were working for them. So now everyone feels even better, I would presume. Um, if you're someone that enjoys working remote, right? Like you
Yeah.
said that, there are benefits to working in office. Um, but if you're someone that enjoys the benefits of remote more, anyway. Um, so Robert, I do want to ask this one just because like you mentioned, you graduated in 2019. Um, so like, as I said before, you're relatively new to the industry. Actually, I don't even know if that's an appropriate term anymore, just because of the rate of indie and people getting started. I don't really know what constitutes as a new in the grand scheme anymore. However, what I'm trying to get to is how did you get into developing and making games? And if you have any words of wisdom that you can share from the experiences and pitfalls that you ran into, Would you mind sharing them?
Yeah, so I'll kind of take this in two. So first off, with how I got into games, I grew up around movies, books, and video games pretty much constantly. Like I loved falling into stories in anywhere I could find them. And I went through all of these phases where I was like, I want to be a writer when I grow up. I want to be a movie director when I grow up. And I knew that you people made games. I just had no idea how. Um, and I was not a someone who grew up programming from when I was like 6. I was like I didn't really know that until around time in high school. I started to get access to like actual computing courses as opposed to the computing courses in middle school that were just typing classes. And then like there was an article in Game Informer on like the top video game schools. I was like, what do you mean this is an option? Uh, and there's places dedicated to them. And in my freshman year of high school, my older sister ends up going to Rochester Institute of Technology, which was on that list. And so it's kind of like, wait, this is an actual school people go to for more than just games, but it's also a game school, and that kind of opened it up as a possibility. Um, and then I ended up going to college, going there studying games. But in those when I realized that was a possibility in the computing classes I had, and then ended up changing high schools to another one that had even more computing classes, and kind of fell in love with programming and as a thinking pattern. And my teachers at my second school really gave me tools to gave me space to experiment with what my projects were, which led to trying out making games and enjoying that process of how do I put these things together, how do I make something interactive, and what does that mean. And yeah, that carried forward into college. And finding a lot, like studying game design, because I got that was my major. And being around so many like-minded people who there were some people who just liked playing games, and then there was people who liked making games, and finding that and being able to be in teams and groups and around that energy, it's kind of hard to not get caught up in it. And just that huge network and finding a community in that space, and that motivated me through. I got my master's in game design as well. They had a two for the price of two sale, and moved through that. And kind of like midway through that, I was like, I'm going games or bust. This isn't, oh, I studied games in college and I'm ending up somewhere else. It's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I feel makes sense for me to do. And I just drove through with that. And there's some spin-off notes there, but to answer like the second question around words of wisdom or advice for that, for me, college was a great choice because it gave a institution where I was going to be tasked literally with homework of making a bunch of things, and learning from those things and being given feedback on those things. I don't think that has to happen in college. It can happen anywhere. It can happen at any time. But going through, and if you want to make games, make the best way to do it is to make games. Make a bunch of tiny ones. If you're learning, you've never programmed before, there's a ton of tutorials now. It's great, like using Unity or Unreal. Try it out. And like, don't make your magnum opus first. Like, oh, can you make Space Invaders? Okay, now you've learned how to move things in a life system and a screen system. Can you now make Breakout, because that's adding physics in? And like learning those little things, and as long as it takes you to make them, a step at a time. And I think that's where to find if you actually like, because it's two different things to like, is to like video games and to like making video games. It's like, do you like doing this? And if you do, then keep making tiny things and start sharing those tiny things. It's just great to just post up, hey, I did a cool game jam, or this is something I've made over the past 6 months. And it doesn't have to be a commercial success or $100 to put it on Steam. You can just put it out there and get eyes on it. And then finding a community of people, whether that's online, whether that's in a local group, whether that's a chapter of the IGDA near you, or just like, oh, this college has a bunch of game jam events. Finding those hosts for those, again, in person or digital, and start talking to people, because once multiple people are excited about making stuff, even if you don't have to work together, but you can both just say like, "Oh, I did a cool thing," and you can start like getting that energy around it, and that's where you end up with collaborators. That's where you can build up that network. But it's not building a network from the idea of, "Here's my business card, please hire me." It's building a network of, "These are people I enjoy being around, who also enjoy doing what I'm doing, and we like seeing both of us succeed." Um, and doing that network again, that can be found in college, that can be found anywhere else. But make a bunch of tiny things, find people that encourage you to make them, and see if you enjoy making games as a skill, and then you've got all the runway in the world.
So thank you for sharing that. And like to start off, like the I like you walking through what like networking is. Because like for a lot of people, that's such an abstract concept. Because like you said, it's not like going up to somebody like, here's my business card, please hire me, right? Which is what kind of it's sold as. Like I've been to school twice. Um, Once for programming back in, right before the housing market crash recession in the States, which also, bled into Canada. And then like a few years later, I went back after I graduated, I went back to school for design. And in both cases, we had like uh, I forget the classes, the what have yous, but they had like portions or talking about like how networking works. And never do they say it as nicely as what you just did? And I've had other guests as well who've said variations of how you put it, but never were like in school was it explained that networking should just be you finding like-minded individuals and doing neat things and being able to talk to those people about those neat things and share them and what have you. It always is through like this lens of you know, this is how you're gonna get fed. This is what you're gonna find someone and you're gonna get them to hire you or whatever, or whatever, or whatever. Um, and like I just wish they sold it more as the way you just kind of did, where it's like, yeah, find some people that enjoy doing stuff, do cool stuff with them, show them the cool stuff, talk about the cool stuff, and that's how networking works. Like I it's it's for whatever reason it's always made more complicated when you have people trying to like explain it from a different lens when like and then people like you come along and just explain it in the most perfect way that doesn't have the weird tinge of um get them to hire you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So thank you for that. I appreciate hearing that and I appreciate hearing like any variations on that cuz like, you know, a lot of people struggle with what networking is, and just hearing it so succinctly and nicely is always a beautiful thing. So again, thank you for putting it in such an easy to digest way that actually makes sense.
thank you.
And one of the other things I wanted to come in on was the how I'm going to paraphrase a bit on this, but effectively that like you realized like going to school for making games was actually a thing. Like it kind of um it's one of those things where like you suddenly realize, wait, like people are doing this. Like I don't think it was to this extent for you, but I've spoken with some people in the past where they like realize as they get older, like wait, the games just don't come into existence on their own. Like people are doing it. Um, but no, I always like hearing like like variations of that realization that like wait, I can just do this. Because it's like it's always funny the moment that you realize, oh, this is a thing that like actual human beings are sitting down and doing, and like I could be one of those human beings. I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but no, thank you for sharing all of that. Like um, I did want to ask this one though, just because like you said you have two for the price of two in game stuff. Um, can you explain like what what that extra step was for the masters? Like what that would have been? Because like I can understand like the base level. I just how do I put it? I'm trying to put it like in a way that makes sense and isn't like weirdly condescending or what have you. Um I have never thought on what like a master's or like a PhD in like game design or what like along like the gaming realm would be. So can you speak to like what the master's portion, like what separated the two? Because I honestly don't know, and I'm curious to hear.
Um, yeah. So the funny aspect of this is RIT just had like, oh, we have some sound bites, and they might get more upset with me about what I'm about to say. But so for a master's at RIT, and it changes depending on the school. Like some put like game masters and like masters of arts. Some put them in masters of sciences. It can depend. Some uh, but like the dynamic that we had at RIT was a master's of game design would be like traditionally a 2 year program like most masters, and the first year is doing a bunch of courses of like taking deeper dives into that subject matter. So while as an undergrad it might be like, here's how you make a physics system, as a graduate student you have like, what is play? um and then in the second year it was a year dedicated to a capstone project, where it was supposed to be something where you worked with other graduate students, and if it wasn't your only course, it was supposed to be like 60% of your course load, and ideally your last semester was your only course, was doing a project in games. It didn't have to necessarily be something that released, but it was like you are trying to make a game, and you are doing something in that game with your team that you write your thesis on, and your investigation into it. Um, and that leads to some interesting situations. Because there's like a counter thing of you want to spend more time working on the game, especially as the end of the year starts looming. But you also need to write that thesis paper, and one of those might be a little bit more fun than the other. Um, and Yeah, so that's what I ended up doing. Is that was the project that became Gristmill, um, and and with a phenomenal team of people, being able to work on that, and in some ways to the point of going, this is what actually might get us jobs. I don't know if anyone will read my thesis paper. And looking at like where we were, it was like we weren't sure what certain deadlines were. We weren't sure what certain stuff was. And like, let's just focus on the game. And ended up taking that and running with it for a bit, and got some awards on it, which I do think, long term, I think it was the right decision to focus on that. But in an academic sense, my thesis is not as strong as it maybe should be. We did do thesis presentations at the end. We never really published them, so there's still an aspect of like, wasn't a master's of science? I don't know. I have the diploma. Interestingly enough, um, I like, but the it's just kind of funny because you talk to other people who have masters of sciences and they're like, wait, you didn't have to do this, you didn't have to do that. And I was like, they gave me the paper. I don't know. I don't know what to do after that. They gave me the paper. I've got a job, and so I'm a success story for the school. But yeah, it was definitely a weird master's process. But the intent was more deep dive schooling, year of capstone, and then you have something to deliver as you've exercised your knowledge to make something, and you have a thesis documenting that process. When it comes to like research and data research into that thesis, that got wobblier, and there's definitely a dynamic of you just told a bunch of students to make something, and they're incredibly good at scoping and would definitely fit it in within 1 year. Actually, that's 9 months. Actually, it's 7 months when you take into account the bumpers on. Oh, yeah, everyone's over scoped to hell. But yeah, that was the process.
So, thank you for that. I understand better now. But at the same time, the idea of letting a bunch of, I'm gonna make the assumption for, low 20 somethings that have may or may not had a lot of real world experience, suddenly being told, yeah, figure out scope, figure out a timeline, figure out all of this stuff. The best you've had in experience wise has been classes, and they were like 3 week projects at best, kind of thing. That that amuses me to no end, just because like you said, it ended up really just being like 7 months or what have you. And I don't see how that would have went any way but sideways, which
Yeah,
just amused me to no end. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah. With my team, I knew the timeline would be tight, and I recruited them up like the big the second semester of the first year of the capstone of the grad process. I was like, I don't know when I should start asking people to be on a team, or like when it's too early to pitch, because like you've only known these people for like a semester and maybe a month or so at this point. And then I heard one other student had asked someone to join the team. And that day I went to like everyone that I wanted and was like, hey, do you want a capstone team? Are you a little bit nervous about not having a capstone team? Would you like to join mine so you don't have to think about this? And my team just immediately had my team, and like it was great because they were all the people that I wanted to work with. No, there were other amazing people in the grad program, but they'd already been like some of them had already been claimed, and I was just like, these are also people I think would work well together, and trying to put that together. So I had my team before the final year started, and over the summer had done some ideation, and so like day one, class one of the second year, I walked in with a paper prototype, and we were able to see if we could make this something fun. And that was a big jump up in being able to make anything out of that game.
Yes, I completely understand how that would definitely benefit. Um, but yeah, I just like the potential sales pitch on that. Like, are you nervous about the future? If you're nervous, I like it just I don't mean this in a bad way. But like in Canada, for example, this will make more sense why this is more amusing to me. In Canada, our medical commercials are not allowed to say what the drug's about. Which
Really?
is a stark difference. Yeah, which is a stark difference for the states, right? So like for us, or for you, for example, in the States, because I grew up in Ontario, close to the border for New York by a few hours at best. So like a lot of, and also it's Canada, so a lot of our stuff is just American. But I had a good chunk of American channels, so am not. I'm very familiar with those commercials for drug ads. So whereas your drug ads would be like, "Do you feel tired during the day? Have you lost your appetite? Are you maybe depressed? You should talk to your doctor about these symptoms and this medic," like, the way it pitches it out. It's like this animated short or like little weird things depending on like, what the medicate who the target audience is or what have you. Um, but like it always like lays out a bunch of these like super generic symptoms and like you should talk to your doctor about some, some depression medication. I just remember the depression ones the most. They always had cartoons for some weird reason. Anyway, in Canada, it'd just be like for right now, Ozempic or whatever is one of the bigger ones, and I don't get TV, and that's like the latest one I've actually seen when visiting family, and it's basically just like a bunch of people existing, and it's like, you know, have you thought about taking Ozempic? Like, and then it goes to like a shot of people like, I feel great with it. Or it's like, just happy people like rowing a boat kind of thing. And like it's just a basic bunch of people like, I started Ozempic. It's great. And like at the end, it's just like talk to your doctor about Ozempic. So like it makes you have to ask them, like, what the hell is this? And that's how all of our medical commercials work. So like the way you pitched it, it reminded me very much of like that vague sense of like inducing dread or like inducing thought in like a thing without being explicitly or like over the top of what that thing could be that they're might be afraid of. Um so yeah, sorry, it reminded me of that, and I've always enjoyed like the weird vagueness of those kind of sales pitches, and the way you like it sounded like you pitched it, it just amused me because it reminded me very much of like just the, are you worried about the future? You should talk to me about the future. And it's like, what would I be like? Anyway, sorry. Thank you for that. It just I'm rambling on it, but yes, thank you for that.
No problem.
Um, so sorry, I've broken my potential segue. So what I'm curious about, as well, Robert, if you don't mind, like, what was there a game? Because you had said that there was when you were younger, you like to kind of consume media, like or like stories or what have you. I'm bumbling up how to paraphrase that. I apologize. However, I'm wondering if there was like a game that made you go, "Oh, this is something I'd like to do." And like, because I imagine like when it comes to the people that are like story writers or whatever, they always have that book or that story that made them say, "Oh, I could do this too." I'm wondering if you had that for games, and if there was, if you'd mind speaking to it.
Um, yeah, the I don't know if there's like a singular video game that did that for me. I do think there were some experiences that were pretty formative in that, and around the point of like moving through um, moving through schools and such. Like when I went to my second high school, it was a live-in dorm high school in the middle of nowhere, with a bunch of other people, and the and like I didn't know anyone at the school. It's all important because I had a Vita with Persona 4 Golden, and having that experience, like I did not fall into a TV, but we fell into games because like what ended up happening is people brought different things. Internet was kind of restricted, but people brought consoles and games and had different types of these. Like my experience with Dark Souls is not I'd played Demon Souls, but it's not crawling a wiki on Dark Souls. Like, what do I need to do? It's sitting in front of a TV at the communal lounge as all of us are trying to figure out how to beat this thing. Like in like a couch co-op experience of one person playing and everyone else trying to figure out what's happening. And when Dark Souls 2 came out, it was like there wasn't even a wiki, so it's doing it all live. And Dark Souls 2 has a huge branching structure, and so having a lot of that community around engaging with these and seeing how a bunch of different people engage with these games, and all wrapped around at a very formative point for me, having a game that I felt incredibly seen in, with Persona 4 Golden, of being, oh crap, I don't know anyone. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I need to find a friend group and find, like, I'm disconnected from what my old hobbies were. What are possible new ones I can do here? What does that mean for me? But I don't know if that made the spark to make games, but that just made like how people engage with games kind of noodle in my head for a bit. But as someone who grew up around like writing and books and movies, it's like people can create things, and I'm doing this programming thing, and so you can create games. But then in college, there at RIT, there is a thing, and a few other colleges, there's a thing called Humans versus Zombies, which is a giant game of tag between a team of humans who have Nerf blasters and socks and a team of zombies who have bandanas. And at RIT, there's a event that happens of a week-long game of this, where it starts and it does not end. You don't play inside, so you're safe inside, but if you sign up for it, that's your week. How do you get to classes becomes a lot more interesting when you're dodging fire. I shouldn't phrase it like that, but it becomes a lot more interesting when you're dodging Nerf darts, or dodging zombies, like hunting you down. And these aren't brain dead people; these are intelligent people. So you have like, crap, Steve knows my schedule, and he knows I come out of that door. But if I go out of that door, then I can jump to the other building, make it down a tunnel, go over and get to class. And if I run the entire way, I can make it before my next class starts. And so like it becomes a game of micro optimizations, and it was really fun to play. And especially when you have hundreds of people doing this, like the games that I first played in were like, I think it might have been 800. But there's, if you survive through the week and you get to the back half of it and you turn a corner and you see like 60 zombies just hanging out outside and they see you with your Nerf blaster, that's an experience when they all run at you. And at night, when the campus is less active with people just trying to go about their day, you would do night missions where it's very concentrated play because the campus is more open, because it's easier to move this around without being disruptive. And you would still go like, okay, we're sneaking around. We have the objective. It's a cardboard box with duct tape on it. It's like, okay, where do we need to take this? Oh, we need to take it across campus. Okay, let's hike up this hill. And you look over the hill and see like 200 zombies walking towards you. And like one of them points and a few of them run forward and you hear them yelling like, no, we don't have to run yet. And you're like, we need to go right now. And like that is such an evocative experience. And what happened is as I played it more, I got into moderating it and seeing the back half of it. So like, what is it that makes this game tick? And what are the variables that go into it? And being able to think of that as my early years at school in video games seeing the variables that I'm like learning how to make mirrored into this is how this play happens. And okay, this happened on Monday, so this can inform what we're doing on Wednesday. And seeing that done live by a collaborative group of people making this game happen. And then I fell into being one of the designers for it. There was an emergency situation. We had to do an election, and I had moderated a bunch, and they just said, "Hey, you go run for this." And I got voted in as one of the VPs for it, who were the designers, and got started being able to make these games. And I think that was the first time where I made a thing that was fully contained with like my knowledge of games, and it wasn't a month-long project. It wasn't a 2-month thing. It was like this was a delivered week-long experience that I spent like a semester making, and we got player feedback. We got live player feedback, and then you kind of get addicted to that. With the moment someone comes up to you after a mission, like, "That was the most fun I've ever had," you're like, "Oh, this is a high I could chase for the rest of my life." And I have. It's just that was I didn't know what aspect of game design I wanted to fall into, and that was a fun miasma of level design and storytelling and narrative design and also community management and working with moderators to be like, hey, today I need you to do this and I need you to talk like this and like how fast can you run? Okay, you rolled your ankle. Okay, so what can we suddenly have to change a bunch of stuff. And that energy of like figuring out how to change it on the fly was great. One of my favorite missions, we were doing a pirate themed game, and me and my other VP were like, we need to be the objectives for this because we are the ones who can think of how to solve problems on the fly. It's a big escort. The zombies were going to have to escort us around campus, and it was late in the week, so we had like 100 zombies out, and they started moving, and we realized as we were approaching this one choke point, we saw a bunch of humans in a safe zone, trying to figure out what to do. Like their challenge that night was to learn the game, or learn the mission, and the zombies were just to keep us safe. Like we might have to change our route, which would feel bad because the humans, their puzzle is to figure out the route, but we might have to change it for safety reasons or because the game's stalling or for just a balance problem. How do we communicate this to humans in a way that doesn't make the zombies feel like we're cheating them by just shouting out the answer, and the humans don't feel like talked down to? One of the things I learned is that zombie players love doing dumb stuff. And this is like peak sea shanty and like TikTok and whatnot. And leading zombies in renditions of What Do You Do with a Drunken Sailor, but coming up with live verses to be the direction of where we are going on campus, that we are chanting out in the meter of What Do You Do with a Drunken Sailor in a live environment, or trying to bounce against the other VP, because if I didn't have a rhythm, I'd be like, we're going to Policini, what do you have? And he's like, I got the next verse, and trying to come up with that in the space between the zombies, singing out the refrain, and then we sing out the next verse, and all of them sing it, and we suddenly transition from how do we communicate to the other half of these players to we have 100 people broadcasting the puzzle wherever we go. It's like, this is fantastic. I couldn't speak for the next day, but like 2 hours of chanting and singing as part of how is this informing our game mechanic and how that all relates to, like in that example, that's a solution that only can exist in that type of live play environment. But those types of systemic interactions and broadcasting and finding the spaces to make those work is all stuff that can still be applied to video games. And so through HVZ, I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. And this is a place to practice that in the most interesting of conditions as I'm then working on my capstone project and other stuff.
So, thank you for sharing that. Not to intentionally start like the whole yellow paint debate again, which by the way I'm a fan of. I'm an idiot. I like being told where to go, what to do. That is like a wonderful use of signposting that fits in with like the version of zombies that everyone is playing, right? Like having, like you said, they just enjoy doing dumb stuff. Being able to signpost in a way that feels fun and like you said, doesn't, isn't like taking away from their experience by giving the answer away or giving like the next steps or what have you away, is a wonderful thing. So like, yeah, that just sounds like a lot of fun and a great lesson in, like you said, you're working on your capstone, you're working on all this other stuff, while also having like a kind of real world example of how things actually work with players en masse, and might not be like a one-to-one comparison, but when you see something that works, you can figure out how to adapt it. So I imagine like all of that was, like you said, getting to do it, having the two coins or whatever. I imagine that would have just been a lot of um reassuring fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, Robert, I want to ask this one, and I'm curious about it because I don't know where this is going to go. Just because you said that, that like in high school, a lot of your gaming was like communal. Um, you kind of lived out like the Persona 3, Persona 4, thing without having to, fight demons or what have you. But I'm wondering, was there a game that you enjoyed that you didn't feel just got enough attention or didn't get enough credit?
Uh, yeah. So, um, one game that I played it back in I forget if I first was playing it in high school versus college, but it's been cheap forever, and it always has like discounts. And it's this weird game called I Divine Cybermancy, um, stylized E.Y.E. It's I believe it's a Source Engine game. It is about three separate games in one. It's an absolutely weird experience, and I adore it because I'm a big fan of friction in games. I like to see a team try something and deliver on that, and even if the intended fantasy of the game might step on other things, it can create a really interesting cohesive whole because it's something has been taken away to facilitate this dynamic. And I, as a game of like hundreds of menus that maybe don't interact amazingly, but each one of them tells an interesting story. Like there's a whole hacking mini game that you can completely ignore that is turn-based, like active time combat, where you can hack a door, and in response it's not, oh, you lost, it's uh that door has hacked you and is walking you off a ledge. You have been killed by a door that you attempted to hack. Like that story can happen there. There's like summoning and magic story of like all of these abilities, or you can just play it as a shooter. I believe it's technically classified as an imsim, but I don't know what that means either. So but it's just such a weird game, and it is also one you can play with multiple people. I think it supports up to like 64 players, which is silly, but I think it was like back in high school, it was like $10, and it would go on sale, so you get a 4-pack for that price. And at that point in high school, you're like, yeah, 250 for a shooter. What's happening? And then you play it, and it's like nothing else. And it's weird and it's strange, and like it's full of because I believe the studio was originally French. I don't know why I said it was originally as if they changed, but I believe the studio is French. So it's got like these weird translated lines, and it just is this fascinating capsule of a team trying to make something massive. And where they don't succeed, it's still interesting. It's still compelling. And it has like a big branching narrative. It has a bunch of structure in it. And it's just so delightfully weird. And it's a serviceable shooter. Like it's a Source Engine game. You have your guns, they work and they're fun. But then everything that adds on to it just lets you go and make this wild experience. And I think it's one that is worth revisiting because it is so strange. The studios come out with other stuff. Sounds like I think most recently was Necromunda Hired Gun, which is also a bunch of weird, crazy systems on shooting. And but it's a little bit more restrained because it's a licensed title and it delivers a more straightforward experience. Whereas I is like this weird scramble of interactivity, and I think it's great for that. And it's so perfectly itself that I really do think it's a fun, weird, strange experience. Um, and it's fun to go through in co-op. It's fun to go through solo. Um, yeah.
So thank you for that. I am not a stranger to I divine supremacy, or cybermancy, sorry. Um, it's sorry, I'm just now reminiscing on just how absolutely bonkers the game is. Because like, you know, I I imagine you had the same kind of apprehension that I'm having now in like trying to describe it because, and that's not like an apprehension of, oh, this could be touchy or whatever. It's just no, the game is like a while, like a week or three ago on Twitter or what have you, there was like the conversation I saw popping off of, well, what is Eurojank? And people saying it's offensive and all this other fun stuff. Um I is Eurojank. If you
Yes.
want to see a love letter to Eurojank, I Divine Cybermancy is that love letter because like it encapsulates all of the stuff that the people that say Eurojank, because it's a positive statement. That's not like an insulting thing. And people that don't understand Eurojank, they think it's like insulting statement. But like no, it's just it's it's the politest way to basically say a game that has jam-packed to the brim with, like, all of these, in some cases, incredibly heavily systematic and technical, like, interactions in its system and all this other stuff, and, it's just it's like a snowball that's, picked up too much speed and it's just going down the hill. Like, enough stuff is done to make it work, and then all these other systems are interacting in the ways that, you never expected. And then at some point you're like, I don't care to fix this. And that's very much what I Divine Cybermancy is that when you like surface level, yeah, it's a serviceable shooter. Like you said, it was a fun little multiplayer experience. It has some interesting quirks, but like when you start diving into it, like you said, you start hitting these weird interactions where like the hack backfired and you're walking yourself off a cliff and you can't stop yourself
Yeah.
because that's like it's just inputting those commands of like, oh, now you're gonna walk, and it's like, well, the ledge was close to you, or like yeah, sorry, yes, you are correct. It is technically, I believe, is classified as an immersive sim. Um, you know, uh, uh, and yeah, like there's not, sorry, yeah, I'm struggling to like say anything about I just because like it, it's, it's, I- if
It's
there's
I.
ever a, yeah, if there's ever a game that is made that delivers on that experience again, I truly think, um, if like we see a weird renaissance of sims going that direction, I think it'll become a subgenre of itself. Um, just because of how, yeah, it's just it's weird. Anyone that's listening is like, oh, it can't be that hard. There's Mandalore, I believe Mandalore Gaming did a brief walkthrough or video on it. There's other people that have definitely done it. Or like it's under $10, I think. Go pick it up yourself. But like what I'm saying is if you don't grasp why it's so difficult just to say what it is, go watch some videos, go give it a shot because like there's nothing else like it, and that's a really weird thing to say. Um, it's such a weird thing to say, but no, thank you for bringing that game up because it's such a wild ride that like it's so perfectly weird and enjoyable on any level that you wish to play it on, like whether you want to go full deep dive or not. Anyway, sorry, now I'm just at risk of talking about and just how that game is. But thank you for the reminder that it exists.
One quick thing on it, because I could also do the same of just talking about it for forever. But uh, you mentioned like it's fun to play on any level that you want to engage with it on. It's also a surprisingly fun speed game because most of the walls are actually there and will stop bullets, but there's a lot of walls that might not stop bullets. And so there's interesting like speed if you're speedrunning it, interesting levels where it's like, oh, if you look at this brick, it lets you shoot this dude 3 buildings away. And it's just like the levels of how that game again is the scaffolding holding it together just keeps finding ways to be compelling again, as you said, every level you engage at it at.
Um, yes, thank you. That and like there as well is another prime example of what makes Eurojank beautiful is like you have those weird, like you said, there's like a single brick. You shoot this brick, you're gonna kill this guy. It's like, well, what about the other bricks? Oh no, they stopped the bullet. But why doesn't this brick? Oh, they messed up the geometry. General shrug at that point, right? Like
Yeah.
it's that's yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for bringing up it's like I said, it's a fantastic game. Go in with your expectations tempered just because it is an older game and it's it is janky, it's Euro jank, but like it's a wonderful game if you go in prepared to enjoy absurd nonsense and jankiness because it's an experience like none other. And that's a weird thing in to say for games, really realistically, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of games like, um you have an idea. You can communicate really well what kind of gameplay you're going to experience or whatnot, right? And being able to say it's a unique experience like no other is something that doesn't come up often anymore in my opinion, you know?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Sorry. Just the come down of having to like step back from that game now. Um so Robert, um I think I think this is the best place to move forward or on that one. Um and that is, outside of video games. Talking about your life outside of games. Um what is it that you do to relax? What is it that you do that you enjoy doing that isn't game related? And if basically your downtime is video game related, I understand and that is still completely fine and valid, but if there were other things, by all means, I would like to hear about them.
Yeah. So I of course play games in my free time. But also most recently, I've my local movie theater chain has like a movie pass type deal, and they play a lot of random stuff, and so that's been fun to kind of fall back in love with going to the movies. $2 tickets makes that a lot easier to do, and just seeing a lot of crazy stuff, things and festival stuff, and just being open to weird movies, the same way that I get open to games and seeing those on a big theater. Uh, I love going to the movies. I've been able to do that a lot more recently. I also do a lot of model building and painting. So I've got a massive Warhammer backlog and um, also doing like Gunpla model building. I try and at least I haven't gotten into Gunpla painting because I don't need two backlogs of painting. Um, and then I bake a lot. If anyone has ever had the displeasure of working with me when I'm in an office, that means you get a lot of baked goods, um, because I like making cookies, I like making cakes, but the problem is if I make them, then I eat them. Versus if I make 2 dozen cookies, then I can eat like two. And well, if you're gonna do two, they're already being a little bit bad. Maybe just go for four. But if I don't eat the entire batch, I bring in the rest and share those. And so that I like baking and model painting for similar reasons. You get to kind of experiment with a known canvas and then like see how that results change and try new techniques and see how that creates stuff. And you have kind of a legacy of it. It's less permanent when it comes to food, but being able to see that progress and like go back to the first time I tried a milk bread recipe or a bagel recipe versus what I'm doing now, I think is really fun. I also go to the gym. Like most game devs my age, I have fallen into bouldering, which means I fall off of bouldering. um, and yeah,
So, thank you for sharing all of that. The bouldering comment is amusing because I've spoken to one or two people that do bouldering adjacent things or bouldering. I've seen other people talking about, so I'd like to know, I like to hear, sorry, that's like a kind of like industry fad, I guess you'd say, or however you want to phrase it. So thank you for all of that. Now, a few quick questions based on everything you just said. Um, one of them when it comes to baking, because baking's hard to say like what's your go-to recipe or something because it's baking, and anyone knows anything about baking, um, outside of like bread, um, and I don't say that with too much disdain because used to enjoy making bread until I moved and the water was garbage and wouldn't work.
Ooh.
Um, that like outside of bread, recipes are very much science based. Not to say bread isn't, but bread is like the most forgiving thing you can ever bake and experiment with and have fun with, in my experience. But anyway, is there any baking hacks or cheats that you could share or recommend? Like for example, the one that I would use was putting whole vanilla pods in the sugar that I would use for making bread, and it would give it this like very subtle
Ooh.
vanilla kind of note to it. Depending on more how many pods you put into it, the more strong it got. And in today's day and age, where like five of those cost like $80, you'd have to be stingy. But anyway, do you have any baking hacks or cheats or things that you found that work really well that you like to incorporate, or would you like to share with people to incorporate?
Um, oh, that's a hard one. I think one that comes to mind is because I've done baking for like vegan friends more recently, and one of the things is like the classic egg wash that maybe doesn't impart a huge ton of flavor, but it adds a nice bit of color. And there's a few different ways to do like a substitute of that without using an egg. Like the classic, oh, if they're vegetarian, use honey. Like again, that might not work for vegans. I don't know why I said might. It's an animal product. The uh, I know some vegans are like, yeah, we deal with honey. Like agave sugar doesn't hit the same. But of course you can use like an sugar and like whisk it down in like a few tablespoons of water, and that's still going to give you like a nice browning aspect. Maple syrup works surprisingly well and doesn't similar like a tablespoon of maple syrup and like 3 tablespoons of water. Whisk that up. It doesn't they can get a little bit softer a bit faster. I've noticed that like with bagels versus an egg wash versus like the maple syrup wash, but it doesn't add in the same way that an egg wash doesn't affect that flavor too much. The maple syrup wash isn't going to make your like even your savory things super sweet. It's going to add a similar bit of crunch because you have the sugar and the maple syrup crystallizing, but it's not going to ruin that balance. And so I found that like I can substitute all these other things for vegans, but I can't find the egg wash substitute, and I've ended up using maple syrup. Um, so that's like the only weird one. I don't think I have a ton of other super interesting hacks. It's just trying out a bunch of stuff. And the big thing, especially if you're doing baking, is just kind of keep a log of conditions. If you try something and it doesn't come out like great, because even the ambient heat or the rising space in it, don't give up on that recipe. Like maybe think about like what was weird about that day, or not even weird, but what was it about that day? Was it 90 degrees? Was it um, super humid? And try and think about those things as possibilities, and then work that in. I'm not saying you can't bake if it's humid outside, but if you have some of that, that's going to give you better information. So the next time you're trying it, you need it for a little bit longer, or you give it more time in this space, because it can be something to iterate through, and just being willing to like it's okay to mess up a dough, and just try again. That's not a reason to toss out a recipe just because it didn't work like that first time.
So, thank you for all of that. I like the maple syrup and water being like a substitute, if you will, to an egg wash. That's like really interesting. So thank you for sharing that. And on the topic of like keeping notes, that makes perfect sense. Like, for example, and I'll speak to, how I took rough notes and was able to figure things out for bread for me when I moved to my apartment. Um, you know, I kind of did the same thing, trying to figure out what elements had changed from when I lived somewhere else. And it all came down to the water treatment, quote unquote, the city or the apartment does to their 50-year-old lines. Um,
Yeah.
just didn't work well. And like like you said, being able, keeping notes and what have you, lets you rule out those weird variables, like the humidity. It's like, well, if you look at it and you're like, well, the humidity was like 3% different. You can probably make the educated guess not the huge thing, right? So like taking notes or being cognizant of the variables, yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea that probably a lot of people getting into it probably don't consider because um as someone that started with bread and likes making bread, um it's like I said, it's like the easiest thing to do, the most forgiving thing to do. So like when it goes bad, you then start really asking questions about what you did wrong, right? And like starting to pay attention to those things. But for other things like cookies, like there's whole charts out there that are like, this is what like half a tablespoon more baking soda does. And it's like the wild swings that it can have. That if you're not taking notes and you just hack down the flour one day instead of like just doing a loose scoop or whatever, like
Yep.
huge wild changes. So yes, for beginners especially, that's beautiful advice. Thank you for that because it's yeah, like I said, it's anyone that's baked for a bit goes, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Should be doing that 100%, right? Um, Now the other thing, really quick, that I want to ask you, just because I am familiar with Gunpla, um, which as we're talking now, I wouldn't be shocked if you looked at my Discord avatar and went, yeah, that track. Um, but I'm curious if someone came up to you like, "Hey, I want to get into doing Gunpla." And by the way, the reason I'm not asking this about like Warhammer or whatever, I just don't know this. So that's Greek to me. But if someone came up to you and was like, "Hey, I want to get into Gunpla," is there a kit that you'd recommend I start with, or a kit that you'd recommend I look at 'cause you think is cool? What kit would that be? So I'm curious.
I think the HT line is really good. If there was a particular show that they like, then I would just encourage like just pick up any kit and get started. If it's something you like, it's gonna be easier to build. If it is just like no, I like every show and I just want to like what is the one the demi barding? Um, no, not the demi barding. The demi trainer from Witch from Mercury. Um, the because the Barding's like the more militarized one. The Demi Trainer is it's a really cute kit. It's got great proportions. It comes together really easily. But the posing is super expressive. It comes with a few accessories. Its accessory kit set is also still available on shelves. It hasn't been marked up like some of the Iron Blooded Orphans ones. Um, and it's just it's really nice kit. It's got clean lines if you want to do panel lining. But the size of it, it's a pretty quick build, and it's just a really expressive one. It's a pretty stable. Its posing is great. It's like feet have like joints in the back and the front, and like it definitely wasn't my first kit, but I think just and like Witch from Mercury has great designs. So yeah, the loaded demi trainer, it's a great grunt. And just a really fun kit to build, put together, and stand alongside everything.
So thank you for that. And I particularly enjoy that because you're the second person on the show that has actually recommended that as like a good starting kit. So thank you very much for that. I just find that amusing that two people have explicitly said this is the one. This is a good one to do. You know.
Yeah. Um, and like Witch from Mercury, like all of their design, and especially if you like the demi trainer, then you can get the demi barding, and then you can swap parts and just get into all the weird bits of gunpla.
Yes, it's a slippery slope because 1 minute you're just like I'll swap this arm, and the next minute you're like planning out 5 kits you can buy to try and kit bash a single kit, and then you're like, "Oh, what do I do with all this extra junk?"
Yeah.
Slippery slope, but yes, thank you for that. Yes. Um, Now, Robert, before I let you go, because I do want to work towards getting you out of here. I do want to stop
Huh.
taking up your time and let you
No
get
problem.
on with your Saturday. However, I do want to hit you up with some lighthearted, nonsensical, random questions. Um, and these are uh, they're meant to be quick, non-judgmental. They're just random lightning round questions. So feel free to answer them however you see fit, and uh, don't think on them too hard. Otherwise, I worry about the mental state that you will go into depending on some of them. Is that okay?
All right.
Awesome. So I'm just gonna pull them up. I'll hit you with 3 of them, and yeah, we'll go from there. If Nintendo released an Animal Crossing fighting game and PETA responded with a people fighting game, which would you refuse to play on principle alone?
Oh, the PETA fighting game. I think Tom Nook's gonna have some crazy combos and some summons that would just be a lot more fun to go through than just like Greg.
than just Greg, the gas station attendant.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. What is the most sarcastic response that Sonic could give to someone asking if his new shampoo was tested on animals?
Only chili dogs.
Yes, I could. That tracks. Yeah, I could see that being his response. Which video game character do you think takes the term yard sale literally?
Uh, Yosuke, Persona 5. He would just be like, all of this land for free, or not for free, but for what price? And completely ignore like all of the tchotchkes on display.
Thank you for that. Incidentally, I think also that is the second time someone has said that for him or him for questions that bring intelligence into a question as well. So thank you for that. Um,
I do think I said Yosuke instead of Yusuke, but because God, their names are so close. But yeah, Persona 5 Yusuke.
oh wow. Thank you. I was immediately thinking of Persona 4 there.
I
But
do think
both
that would work as well. I think both of them are equally silly when it comes to any matter of intelligence.
um yes, both of them fit, and thank you for it going either way on the naming because my memory is saying both of those names are very similar, and yeah, so thank you
Yeah.
for that. Now, Robert, as I said, I did want to work you towards the door so that you could enjoy your Saturday and get on with your day without me stealing time from it. However, if there was anything else you did want to discuss, a cool game, what you're doing, or something you just feel more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also be including in the episode description.
Yeah, I think two games that have come to mind just in the background of games I don't think get enough credit. Steel Lance Arena International. It's kind of like a pseudo sequel to Phantom Crash. Is a great little like sports mech game for the PS2 that I think is aged surprisingly well. And the club on the PS3 is like you look at it and it's like, oh, this is a cover based shooter, and actually it's a time trial racing game, which like got me interested into like that whole dynamic of time trials. Like it was something I always ignored on racing games growing up. It's like I want to race other things, and the club and those micro optimization. So two other just games from my childhood that I think people should check out. But yeah, the as I said earlier, I'm a technical narrative designer at Sony Santa Monica, which means I can't talk too much about anything. But the I can be found making nonsense over on Twitter at Thrown Error. If you're curious and stuff I've worked on in the past, that also has a link to my portfolio site. And yeah, don't have too much else to plug. Just that's where you can find me. I'm Thrown Error pretty much about anywhere else, but I'm a perpetual lurker, so I just kind of go through bouts of engagement on any given media form. And yeah, that's me.
So, thank you so much for that, Robert. I'll put, like I said, your Twitter and your website. I'll make sure that is in the episode description. Can you repeat the other title, not the club, once more? I went to write it
Oh,
down and I didn't catch it in time.
yeah, it's SLAI. The full title is Steel Lancer Arena International, which is a wonderful word salad. Um, but yeah, it's like a little bit of UFC, a little bit of Armored Core, and a little bit of NASCAR are kind of blended together with a murder mystery on top of it. It's a delightful little game. And it's another one that I think was just kind of forgotten in some of that PS2 era space. But I was playing it recently, and the way it does, like it's cyber war, like you can feel the budget of the game and also where they made choices to best use that. Like, oh, if all of these open world environments of these towns are just kind of a terminal that you move through on your computer, then we don't have to make an entire village. Like we don't have to model New York. We just model a like CPU scape, and feeling some of that, and just a lot of really interesting design around it. Um, and it was one of those games that like you grab as a kid because you're like, that cover looks cool. It has a robot with a gun, like that. And then you put a huge amount of time into it, and so it's always been up there for me.
So, thank you for sharing that, and and going back to that one because like I said, I heard the Steel Lancer part, but I missed everything else, and I'm gonna look into that because that sounds worth a look. I did a quick Google as well, and it looks. Um, I immediately understand what you mean, where like some of the trade offs might have been, but like at the same time on paper, that sounds like it'd be interesting. So thank you very much. I'm
Yeah,
gonna take a look into that one just because, like I said, it sounds interesting enough to at least look at, right?
yeah.
But outside of that, though, if there wasn't anything else, I will get out of your hair and let you go.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for agreeing to be on this. I really appreciated you making the time and joining me for a fun conversation.
Yeah.
So thanks again to Robert for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of the music from the title track from Road Steep. And be sure to check out the episode description for links to socials, websites, and other means that will allow you to learn more about or support Robert and the podcast. While you're doing that, share, like, follow, and whatever else you feel makes the algorithm work. Thanks, until next time.